"Sir, step back. This is private property." Isaiah Bell stood frozen on his own driveway, clutching a pink violation slip in one hand while a white man in khakis and a laminated badge jabbed a finger toward his chest. It was barely 8 a.m., and already 2 neighbors had stepped onto their porches, silent, observing, saying nothing. "I live here," Isaiah said flatly, jaw locked, trying to control his voice. "This is my driveway. That's my name on the deed." "You've already received multiple warnings," the man snapped. "You were told that visible trash bins are not permitted after 6:30 a.m. You're in breach, again." Isaiah held up the notice. It was out for 15 minutes. Pickup came late. "Look around, 3 other bins are still out. Where are their tickets?" Douglas Hale, the HOA compliance officer, shifted his weight. "We respond to complaints." "So someone's been filing complaints specifically about me?" The pause was longer than it should have been. Across the street, an elderly white couple stood behind their storm door, watching. A few doors down, Mrs. Patricia Langley, the HOA president, stood in her robe on her porch, arms folded tight, mouth set in a thin line. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. Just stared. "Just store your bin promptly next time," Hale said, his tone clipped now. "This is your 4th citation. 1 more and you'll be subject to a formal HOA disciplinary hearing." Isaiah took a slow breath. "This is harassment." "No, Mr. Bell. This is enforcement." Then Hale turned and walked away, his clipboard bouncing with each step like punctuation. Isaiah stood alone in the morning sun, pink notice fluttering in the wind, while the quiet street swallowed the confrontation whole. He didn't yell. He didn't follow. But inside his chest, something clicked. This wasn't about trash. And it never had been. By the time he stepped back inside, his coffee had gone cold. The notice joined a growing pile on the kitchen counter, for now, each one more absurd than the last. The first had come a week after he moved in, citing audible disturbances after hours. The alleged offense? Playing Marvin Gaye through a Bluetooth speaker at 6:15 p.m. on a Friday. The second was for unauthorized lawn modifications, referring to the native wildflowers he'd planted in a neat strip along the backyard fence, flowers his mother used to grow, now deemed inconsistent with community aesthetic. The third had arrived 2 days ago, accusing him of blocking the sidewalk with his car, even though his wheels never crossed the line of his own driveway. And now the trash can. He stared at the notice like it had insulted him personally. Maybe it had. Bruno padded into the kitchen, his golden tail wagging lazily. Isaiah bent down, scratched behind his ears, and sighed. "I guess we're gonna have to start documenting everything now, huh?" Bruno blinked, offered a small woof, then wandered toward his food bowl. Isaiah pulled out his phone, took a photo of the notice, then stepped back outside. One by one, he walked down the street snapping photos of the other bins still sitting in plain view, untouched, unbothered. When he reached the Jeffersons' driveway, he hesitated. Their bin was half full, lid cocked open, an Amazon box poking out like a tongue. He took the picture anyway. Then he went back inside and opened a fresh folder on his laptop. Pine Ridge pattern. He began dropping in the images. It felt petty. It felt excessive. But it also felt necessary. By noon, an email had landed in his inbox from the HOA board. Subject: Formal citation, Code 12.4 violation, repeat offense. Mr. Bell, as you've now accumulated 4 citations within a 60-day period, your case will be reviewed at the next board meeting. Attendance is not mandatory but strongly advised. He stared at the screen, jaw twitching. There was no option to appeal. No explanation for why his offenses were being tracked with military precision while others were ignored. Just a curt reminder that he was on thin ice. He didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, he forwarded the email to his sister, Malika, a civil rights paralegal in Decatur. He added a short message beneath it. "Tell me I'm not crazy." Later that evening, Isaiah took Bruno for a walk. The sidewalks were quiet. The houses were tidy, painted in varying shades of beige and gray, each with perfectly trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, and flags that fluttered more for show than pride. A young mother pushing a stroller crossed to the opposite side of the street when she saw him. A man on his porch paused his leaf blower and watched him walk past without a nod. He reached the community park and let Bruno off-leash for a bit. The dog darted toward the small pond, chasing dragonflies like they owed him money. Isaiah pulled out his phone again, opened the HOA portal, and reviewed the bylaws. The language was polite but flexible enough to be twisted. Terms like nuisance, visual clutter, and unauthorized modifications, repeated over and over again, subjective, interpretive, and selectively enforced. He shook his head. This wasn't just about enforcement. This was about control. And he was the target. The next morning, another notice appeared, this time folded neatly and tucked under his windshield wiper. Violation: improper vehicle storage, unapproved parking angle. Fine, $50. Isaiah stared at it in disbelief. His car was in his driveway, parked perfectly straight. He hadn't moved it since last night. Across the street, Mrs. Langley watched from her porch again. No coffee cup this time. No robe. Just her arms crossed, mouth tight. Isaiah unfolded the papers slowly. The signature at the bottom read, P. Langley, board president. She wasn't hiding it anymore. This was personal. He stepped back inside and updated the file on his laptop. He added a new folder, parking ticket, August 4th. Then he added another called board members. He typed a note under her name. Langley, Patricia, lives 3. Present at every violation. Never speaks. Always watches. The HOA wasn't a governing body anymore. It was a system of quiet punishment, wrapped in passive-aggressive language and faux professionalism. And he had the paper trail to prove it. But he still didn't know what was coming next. Or who would blow the lid off everything. Because 3 streets over, a quiet neighbor had seen enough. And they had screenshots of a private HOA group chat, where Isaiah's name came up more than once. Not as a neighbor, but as a problem. The screenshots first landed in Talia Reeves' inbox at 10:41 p.m. She had just finished grading a stack of 8th grade essays when the ping came from an unknown Gmail address. The subject line read, "You should see this from inside the HOA." She almost deleted it. Anonymous emails were rarely worth the click. But something about the subject line, the fact that it wasn't dramatic, just cold, made her pause. She opened it. There were exactly 7 image attachments. Each one a screenshot from what looked like a private messaging thread, a group chat, clearly between multiple HOA board members. The interface looked like Facebook Messenger, though the names had been cropped in some and fully visible in others. The first message was dated 3 weeks ago. Langley. He's got that trash bin out again. What is it with him? Hill. You'd think he'd read the rules by now. Or maybe he just thinks they don't apply to him. To Filmer. Or he's testing us. He wants to see how far we'll let it slide. Classic behavior. Talia's stomach tightened. She didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe it wasn't about who she thought it was. But the next screenshot confirmed it. Langley. Mr. Isaiah Bell, Unit 3B. The one who had that jazz music on the patio the other week. That's not what this community is supposed to sound like. Another board member responded with an emoji. To Filmer. We're going to lose control of this place if we don't hold the line. You let one exception slip and it becomes a trend. Talia closed her laptop and just sat there in silence. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but her mind was already racing. She had suspected for weeks that something was off. Isaiah's name had come up too many times at HOA meetings. She hadn't liked the way Patricia Langley spoke about him, not outright hateful, but coded, careful, calculated. She reopened the email and clicked on the last screenshot. It was the most damning of all. Langley. He's not the type that moves into Pine Ridge and blends in quietly. We either set the tone now, or this place becomes something else entirely. Something else. Talia could hear the unspoken word. Isaiah didn't know it yet, but he had been marked from the moment he moved in. Talia wasn't a whistleblower by nature. She preferred low conflict, handled her own business, smiled politely at neighbors, and minded her garden. But what she read that night felt radioactive. It burned in her chest. The next morning, she printed every screenshot and folded them into a plain manila envelope. No return address. No note. Just the raw truth. Then she drove to Unit 3B. She didn't knock. She waited until the street was quiet, mid-morning, after school drop-offs and before lunch walkers hit the sidewalks. She slipped the envelope through Isaiah's mail slot and walked back to her SUV without a word. She didn't know how he'd react. She just knew she couldn't keep it to herself. Isaiah found the envelope 2 hours later. He'd just come back from the leasing office after filing another complaint, this time about the parking violation. The manager had given him a sympathetic smile and a hollow, "We'll look into it," the same one she offered every time. Nothing ever came of it. When he saw the envelope on the floor, his first instinct was suspicion. No label. No handwriting. But it was too thin to be a threat and too neat to be junk. He tore it open. He sat on his couch for 45 minutes and read the screenshots over and over. At first, he didn't move. Then his legs started to shake, not out of fear, but a slow, rolling anger that crept from his chest into his jaw. It wasn't just bias. It wasn't just neighbors being cold. This was calculated. This was a group of people in power targeting him with full intent and zero shame. He wasn't just being watched, he was being managed like a pest. Every citation. Every knock. Every smile that felt just a little too tight. It all made sense now. He scrolled to Patricia Langley's line again. This is not what this community is supposed to sound like. He felt sick. Then he opened his laptop. By nightfall, Isaiah had compiled a detailed file, a timeline of every violation he'd received, corresponding photos, screenshots of other neighbors breaking the same rules without consequence, and now, the images from the group chat. He sent 2 emails. The first to HOA Legal Compliance, requesting a formal ethics review. The second to MetroView Journal, a local online news outlet that had covered HOA abuse stories in the past. He didn't write a dramatic headline. He didn't try to make it go viral. He just attached the evidence, offered a short summary, and hit send. Then he sat back in his chair, hands clasped, heart pounding in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not fear. Not even rage. It was clarity. The story didn't blow up overnight. It started as a whisper. A few neighbors asking vague questions at the mailboxes. A couple of cold shoulders turning warmer. Then someone on the Pine Ridge Community Facebook page posted, "Does anyone know what's going on with the board? I heard someone leaked screenshots." That post got removed within an hour. But the conversation had already left the neighborhood. 2 days later, MetroView Journal published a story. Screenshots reveal HOA targeted black homeowner in Georgia subdivision. Private messages between board members reveal racially charged statements and possible discriminatory enforcement. The screenshots were redacted. Names were blurred in the article. But inside Pine Ridge, everyone knew exactly who was who. The comments section exploded. Some readers were outraged. Others doubled down in defense of the HOA. But the damage had been done. Isaiah's name was out there now. So were the words they had used to describe him. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. They didn't invite Isaiah. But he showed up anyway. He didn't make a scene. He stood at the back of the room in a navy sweater, holding a copy of the article and the full printout of the chat messages. When Patricia Langley tried to avoid eye contact, he raised the packet slowly, deliberately. "I'll be filing a formal complaint," he said, his voice low but firm. "And I expect a full audit of every citation I've received." Nobody clapped. Nobody spoke. But nobody stopped him either. He walked out without waiting for a reply. That night, Isaiah sat on the balcony with Bruno curled at his feet. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't wondering if another notice would appear, or if he'd be fined for breathing too loud. He knew it wasn't over, not even close. But now he had proof. And soon, the people hiding behind rules and roles would have nowhere left to hide. Because the paper trail wasn't just growing. It was burning. The meeting room in Pine Ridge Estates clubhouse smelled like lemon disinfectant and tension. It was Saturday morning, barely past 9 a.m., and every folding chair was taken. Retirees in polos and visors sat shoulder to shoulder with young parents clutching reusable coffee cups. A teenage girl scrolled through her phone in the back row while her mother stared daggers at the HOA board seated behind a cheap plastic table draped with a vinyl banner that read, "Pine Ridge, where community comes first." No one was smiling. Patricia Langley sat dead center, hands clasped on the table, a white binder in front of her labeled crisis response. To her left was Charles Gilmore, face flushed, jaw tight, arms folded. Next to him, Douglas Hale scribbled notes furiously in a legal pad, occasionally adjusting his tie like it might loosen the scrutiny. Inez Shipley, the only board member who had remained silent during the leaked group chat, looked like she hadn't slept in days. The murmur in the room died down when Isaiah Bell walked in. He didn't make a show of it. No grand entrance. Just him in a crisp button-up, jeans, and a folder tucked under one arm. But everyone saw him. A few neighbors stiffened. Others shifted, uncomfortably aware of where they stood. He took a seat in the second row, directly in front of the board. Patricia cleared her throat. "We're here today to address the recent article published in the Metroview Journal," she began, voice steady but brittle. "Let me be clear, the HOA does not condone discriminatory behavior of any kind. The private messages that were leaked were informal, out of context, and do not reflect the values of Pine Ridge." A woman from the third row raised her hand. Then why was only one homeowner fined 4 times in 60 days while others weren't touched? Patricia paused. "We respond to complaints. That's how the system works." Inez shifted in her chair, but said nothing. A man in the back called out, "Yeah, and who keeps making those complaints? Isn't it this same group?" The room stirred. Isaiah sat motionless, his folders still closed. He didn't need to speak. The screenshots had spoken for him. Charles Gilmore finally broke his silence. "Let's not pretend we're the enemy here. This community has standards. That's why we moved here, and that's why property values have gone up. Mr. Bell was cited for violations, just like anyone else would be." Isaiah looked him in the eye. "No one else was," he said calmly. "Not for the same things. Not in the same time frame. And none of them were discussed in a private group chat where they were referred to as problems." Someone whispered, "He's right." A middle-aged white woman stood up, hands shaking slightly. "I live 2 doors down from him. My trash bin stays out until noon every week. I've never received a notice." Charles opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Isaiah continued, his voice even. "You wrote me up for a flower bed. For parking on my own driveway. For 15 minutes of music. Then you talked about me behind closed doors like I was a threat. This wasn't about rules. It was about control." Patricia's jaw clenched. "Mr. Bell, this forum isn't for accusations. It's for accountability," someone interrupted. It was Talia Reeve. All heads turned. She stood near the back, holding a printed copy of the article. "I was the one who leaked the screenshots. And I did it because I couldn't sit back and pretend that what I saw wasn't wrong." Patricia's face went pale. Talia kept going. "You didn't just bend the rules. You used them as a weapon, selectively, quietly, hoping no one would notice. But people did. And now you're trying to backpedal instead of owning it." Murmurs spread like wildfire. Patricia started to speak, but Douglas Hale cut in first. "I think we need to step back and review everything before making any assumptions." Isaiah rose from his seat. "No more reviews. No more emails. I'm filing a formal complaint with the state's HOA Oversight Board, and I'm meeting with a civil rights attorney next week. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about what you've built here, and how you've used your positions to enforce a version of community that excludes people who don't look or sound like you." He turned to leave. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just done. As he walked out, no one said a word. Not even Patricia. That night, Talia received an anonymous voicemail on her landline. "You're stirring up trouble that doesn't concern you. Not smart." She replayed it twice, then deleted it. The next morning, a note was taped to her front door. "We liked this place better before you started acting like the moral police." She took a photo and added it to the folder she'd quietly begun keeping on her desktop. Pine Ridge Pushback. Isaiah received no direct threats, but the signs were there. His mailbox door had been bent backward one morning. A pile of dog feces was left directly at his doorstep the day after the community meeting. He didn't flinch. He just documented everything. Photos. Time stamps. Witness names when he had them. He didn't want vengeance. He wanted truth. The pressure began to fracture the board. Inez Shipley resigned quietly the following week, leaving a short message on the community portal. I joined this board to improve the community, not participate in discrimination. I can no longer be part of something that punishes residents unevenly based on appearance and assumption. Patricia tried to maintain control. She scheduled a vote to censure Isaiah for publicly damaging the HOA's reputation. The proposal failed, barely, after 3 newer residents abstained. That alone was enough to rattle her. Then came the email. Not from Isaiah. Not from Talia. But from the Jeffersons, the older white couple across the street who had rarely spoken a word since he moved in. They submitted a formal petition demanding a full ethics investigation and temporary suspension of board leadership pending the outcome. 17 households signed. On a quiet Wednesday morning, a notice appeared on every resident's door. Emergency Community Assembly, Saturday, 10 a.m., Clubhouse. Isaiah stood on his porch holding the notice. His hands didn't shake. Bruno sat beside him, tongue lolling lazily. For the first time since moving in, Isaiah felt the air shift. Not because the fight was over, but because the silence had finally broken. The community wasn't unified, but it was awake. And sometimes, that was the first real threat to power. By 9:35 a.m., the clubhouse was already full. Rows of metal chairs lined the tiled floor, and every single one was taken. A few residents leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, eyes wary. The air was heavy, not just with heat, but anticipation. Pine Ridge Estates had held many meetings, but never like this. Isaiah stood outside the double doors, looking in through the narrow window panes. He could see the board seated at the front, huddled behind their long table. Patricia Langley wore a beige pantsuit and a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Charles Gilmore whispered something to her, but she didn't nod. She was still. Isaiah could also see Talia sitting on the left side of the room, her expression unreadable, a folder on her lap and a phone set to record. Mr. Fry, the soft-spoken man from Unit 5C, sat next to her, his arms folded across his chest. At 9:45, the murmur inside dropped to silence. Isaiah stepped in. The sound of his shoes on tile felt louder than it should have. Some people looked away. Others didn't. One woman, an older Latina who worked the front desk at the nearby dental clinic, gave him a slow nod. He returned it. No one offered him a seat, so he remained standing near the sidewall. Patricia rose and tapped the microphone. "We appreciate everyone showing up this morning," she began, her voice projecting calm authority. "This emergency assembly is in response to recent concerns raised about the HOA board's handling of certain resident interactions, as well as the nature of private communication leaked without consent." She paused, as if expecting applause or support. She got neither. "We understand there are questions. That's why we're here, to answer them. But I do want to make clear that the board has always acted in accordance with community guidelines. We are volunteers, giving our time." Isaiah's voice cut in, firm and clear. "No one's questioning your time. We're questioning your judgment." A few people shifted. Some inhaled. Patricia's eyes flicked toward him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bell," she said, measured. "This is a structured forum. If you'd like to submit a formal question..." "There's nothing formal about what you've done." Isaiah stepped forward, no notes, no script. Just the folder in his hand, held like a shield he didn't intend to lower. "I've lived in Unit 3B for 5 months. In that time, I've received more citations than the rest of this room combined. I've been fined for leaving a trash bin out for 15 minutes. For planting flowers. For music played before sunset. For parking my car in my own driveway. And every time I've asked for clarification, the answers got thinner, colder, and more evasive." Patricia kept her face neutral, but her hands twitched. Isaiah held up the printed screenshots. "And then these surfaced. Group chats between members of this board referring to me as a type, calling me a trend, and accusing me of not blending in. You didn't just enforce the rules. You bent them around me, weaponized them, made sure I knew I wasn't welcome, not because I broke guidelines, but because I disrupted your comfort. Someone clapped. A single sharp clap. Then a few more joined. Not wild. Just steady. Isaiah kept going. I wasn't the only one who saw it. I wasn't the only one treated like noise. I know of at least 2 other families who've moved out in the past year after receiving similar treatment. But they didn't speak up. They didn't have proof. They just left. He pointed at Patricia without raising his voice. You didn't just fail to protect this community. You corrupted it. She finally responded, voice icy. And what exactly would you like us to do, Mr. Bell? Resign? Burn it all down over a few screenshots taken out of context? Talia stood. They weren't out of context. Patricia turned toward her, annoyed. You don't get to interpret private remarks. They weren't private if they shaped public decisions, Talia said. You fine people behind a curtain and expect no one to pull it back. But it's pulled now. Everyone can see it. Charles Gilmore leaned forward, clearly agitated. So what? He gets to grandstand and we all just kneel? You think this neighborhood runs itself? We enforce the rules to protect order. Whose order? Talia asked. The kind where a white neighbor can break 3 rules and get a wave, while a black homeowner gets a notice every time he breathes too loud? More murmurs. Some nods. One man near the back raised his hand, voice shaking. My son plays drums in the garage twice a week. But never once got a citation. I live 2 units from Mr. Bell. Another woman spoke next. Our kids skateboard up and down the sidewalk, make a racket. No fines. But my black nephew came over to visit, and someone left a note asking if he was soliciting. Charles looked like he wanted to shrink into his blazer. Patricia scanned the room and realized something unsettling. The silence was gone. And once people start talking, the old power doesn't work anymore. Isaiah looked around and took in the faces, some ashamed, some relieved, others simply listening. He held up the folder. I've already filed a formal complaint with the State Oversight Committee. I've also connected with a civil rights attorney. But I didn't come here today for retribution. I came because I want to live here like anyone else, without having to record every step I take or wonder if the next HOA meeting is about me. Patricia stepped back from the mic. Then what do you want? Isaiah didn't hesitate. A vote. Today. Not just on leadership. On rewriting this community's enforcement procedures. Transparency, appeal options, anti-bias training. And if that fails, then yes, I want resignations. The room erupted, not in chaos, but conversation. People turned to each other, muttering, calculating, shifting. For the first time, real decisions were being considered. And Patricia saw it. She looked down at her binder, then out at the residents who once quietly trusted her to decide what was best for them. That trust had eroded. And erosion doesn't reverse overnight. We'll reconvene for an official vote, she said, voice deflated. Within the next week. Isaiah nodded. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He just stepped back, returned to his spot against the wall, and watched as the community he had been pushed out of began pulling itself back into shape. Not perfectly. Not immediately. But visibly. Later that day, Isaiah walked Bruno down the same stretch of sidewalk where he'd been stared down, fined, and ignored. But now, the stares were different. A teenage boy nodded at him. An older woman waved, hesitantly but honestly. A man he'd never spoken to before offered a quiet, "Glad you said something." He didn't respond with words. Just a nod. Just a hand on Bruno's leash. For the first time, the weight in his chest felt lighter. Because fighting back wasn't just about winning. It was about being seen. The HOA didn't fall apart overnight. It didn't collapse in a storm of resignations or viral footage or handcuffed arrests. That's not how these things usually happen. Real accountability, especially in a place like Pine Ridge Estates, moves slower. It creaks like rusted hinges on a door no one's dared to open in years. But it does move. And Isaiah Bell made sure of that. 2 weeks after the emergency assembly, the board reconvened for the vote. The community turnout was the highest in the HOA's 10-year history. What had once been sleepy procedural affairs full of passive nods and coffee stirring now buzzed with clipped questions, printed bylaws, and hard truths laid bare on the table. Patricia Langley didn't show up. She sent a short email to the community portal 2 hours before the meeting. After careful reflection and considering the distraction my continued leadership may cause, I am stepping down effective immediately. I maintain that my actions were taken in good faith, but I understand that perception matters, and I do not wish to divide the neighborhood further. No apology. No ownership. Just retreat. Charles Gilmore followed her lead the next morning, claiming health reasons. Douglas Hale tried to hold on, but the quiet pressure from residents, one by one withdrawing support, refusing to sign off on his decisions, and voting down every motion he introduced, eventually pushed him out. The board was gutted and replaced by a mixed panel of residents, many of whom had never even considered joining before. But now they understood why it mattered. Power, unchecked, never stays neutral. Isaiah didn't run for a position. He declined when asked. He wasn't interested in holding power, just in making sure it didn't hold him hostage again. Instead, he worked with the new board to draft and ratify the Community Transparency Amendments, a collection of 6 policies that became the backbone of Pine Ridge's internal reform. They weren't radical. They were human. Rule 1. All citations must include photographic evidence, time-stamped and documented, made available to the cited resident within 24 hours. Rule 2. Any citation may be appealed in writing and reviewed by an independent subcommittee within 10 business days. Rule 3. Enforcement patterns will be reviewed quarterly to ensure fairness and equity across demographic lines. Rule 4. All HOA board communications regarding individual residents must be retained and made available for audit upon request. Rule 5. No anonymous complaints will be acted on without corroborating evidence. Rule 6. All board members must complete certified anti-bias and ethics training before assuming duties. What changed most wasn't just policy. It was perception. The whispers stopped. The sideways glances faded. People no longer looked through Isaiah. They looked at him. And when they did, they didn't just see a man with a clipboard full of citations or a story that made the local news. They saw a neighbor who stayed when it would have been easier to leave. They saw someone who didn't scream or curse or threaten, but stood up anyway, clear and steady, until the truth outlasted the denial. Some of them even saw themselves. Talia's front porch became something of a landmark in the weeks that followed. Neighbors who had never spoken more than hello stopped by to thank her for what she leaked. A few were still cautious, unsure how much support they were allowed to show. But she noticed more and more people walking by and waving. Some even brought baked goods. She didn't need applause. She just wanted integrity to feel less lonely. Isaiah and Talia stayed in touch, but not like co-activists. They had dinner once. Talked books. Laughed about how quiet everything had suddenly become. Peace, they realized, is louder when it's earned. One evening in early fall, she sent Isaiah a link. It was to a new article in MetroView Journal. Pine Ridge, a community's reckoning, and a blueprint for change. The journalist had followed up, interviewed residents, and laid out how the neighborhood transformed after the group chat leak. It wasn't a puff piece. It was thoughtful. Honest. Near the end, the article quoted Isaiah. You don't fight back because you think it'll fix everything. You fight back because silence never has. And because if one person speaks up, it gives the next person permission to stop pretending they're okay. The quote spread. Not on a grand, national scale, but in community forums, in HOA Facebook groups, on neighborhood Reddit threads. People reposted it, debated it, echoed it. Some even started asking what their own communities were hiding behind quiet rules and polite fences. Isaiah still lived in Unit 3B. He still walked Bruno every evening, but the tension that used to tighten his shoulders with every step had unraveled. He waved more, talked more, sat on his porch longer. And when a new neighbor, a young black couple with a toddler, moved in across the street, Isaiah didn't hesitate. He brought them a welcome basket, introduced himself, offered to walk them through the HOA portal so they knew what to expect, and how to challenge anything they found unfair. The couple laughed. They'd already heard about him. One Sunday afternoon, Isaiah returned home from the grocery store to find a letter taped to his front door. Not a fine. Not a threat. Just a plain envelope, handwritten. Inside was a note. You didn't just change the rules. You changed the way people see. Thank you. It wasn't signed. But that didn't matter. Some acknowledgments speak louder in silence. A few weeks later, Isaiah sat at his desk and opened a blank document. He wasn't sure what he was writing yet, but he knew he wanted to tell the story right, not just the violations and screenshots, but the quiet bruises of dignity, the weight of measured calm, the rage that had nowhere to go, and the final deep exhale that came with change. He titled it, The New Rules. It wasn't a speech or a manifesto. It was a record. And records matter. Because history doesn't rewrite itself. People do. If you made it to this point in the story, you felt what Isaiah felt. Frustration, betrayal, the exhaustion of trying to belong in a place that kept trying to uninvite him quietly. You also felt the power of one neighbor pressing record. One woman saying, "Not this time." One man choosing to stay and speak. Now ask yourself, what would you have done if it were your neighbor? What would you do if it were you? If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel something, think something, or look differently at the quiet systems around you, then let it keep going. Share this video. Pass it on to someone who lives behind gates in silence. Someone who's been watched too closely or written off too quickly. Leave a comment. Not just to react, but to reflect. What part of this story reminded you of something you've seen, or felt, or stayed quiet about? And if you want more stories like this, real ones, raw ones, the kind that expose and uplift,